welcome to Two Boomer Women. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I've been talking with boomer women for almost a decade now. Well, I guess I've been talking to boomer women all my adult life. Reinventing myself several times along the way, though, but always focused on us, boomer women. With this incarnation of Two Boomer Women, I'll be interviewing other women who have a message of interest for our demographic. If you want to hear about or learn about something specific, let me know and I'll find someone who understands us to talk about it. There's a contact page at twoboomerwomen.com. If you want to be a guest on Two Boomer Women, bring it on. There's an application form at the website too. Finally, this show is all about conversation. We women know its value. We know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. As we enter the final month of my first year flying solo on this podcast, I've been puzzling who to have as guests. As always, life unfolds. My guest today realized her career in chiropractic with 3 foundations: empathy and compassion for helping people, second, a love of science, and third, a love for living life to the fullest. These are some of the reasons I wanted Leslie to kick off the month we are often spending indulging our waistline. We socialize instead of exercise, and many of us contemplate what we'd like to change up as the new year approaches. These days, today's guest helps people debunk the myths surrounding diet, exercise, genetics, and lifestyle. She helps people find balance so they can holistically manage their health and move forward with clarity at a pace that's comfortable yet challenging. And she helps navigate the thorny confrontations of telling physicians that we are choosing a drug-free path and expect cooperation. Now, much of this intro is direct from Leslie's website, and it was this quote that confirmed my choice of guest for today. I help ambitious people, mostly women who are sick and tired and want their mojo back, so they can live with energy and vitality. Dr. Leslie Kasanoff, welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Good to be here.
You have quite a science-based background. Please tell our listeners how you came to be the practitioner you are today.
Okay, well, I actually started out as a medical lab scientist. And when I was completing the very end of my internship in that 5-year program, one of the very last things that I had to do was to assist at the bedside for a bone marrow biopsy. And yeah, I just saw the look on your face. Yes, that's only the beginning.
I have sympathetic body parts.
Yeah. Anyway, when I walked into the room, the person that was laying in the bed was a little old lady who looked to my 22-year-old eyes like she was 110. And it was just a horrendous procedure. The standard of the day was that they were doing bone marrow biopsies on the sternum. So this male physician was plunging a large needle into this woman's chest, and just blood-curdling screams that just like sucked all the energy out of the room. It was a horrible experience, Agnes. And so he gets the sample, he hands it to me, I make the requisite microscope slides and take those and the rest of the sample back to the lab, and I hand them to the senior tech and tell her about the little old lady in the bed. And she looks at me with these sad eyes and she says, "But Leslie, they don't even treat leukemia in patients that old." Flabbergasted is about the most polite word I can think.
Yeah.
Basically, in those 2 seconds, the light bulb went on, and I realized, not only that I did not want to be there because I felt so horrendous about having done something, contributed to that, and not wanting to contribute to something like that again, but I also, in those few seconds, realized that I was helpless in that position or in any position I could ever grow to from there to ever have an effect on changing that paradigm. So that's basically when I realized that I needed to be on the other side of the fence, keeping people from having to get into that hospital bed in the first place. And that's basically what I've dedicated the rest of my life to. So fast forward, I did go back to school and became a chiropractor, had a successful chiropractic practice locally for about 25 years. And then through my own changes and stuff, started morphing into more of the health coaching and consulting.
So I want to get obviously into that today. But before we go there, I want listeners to understand that you aren't just beautiful and fit and smart. Apparently you've had, I am so glad that your dog just did that. It's usually mine. Listeners are used to my dog barking. Sometimes she just won't stop. Anyways, apparently you've had relationships with ice cream, injury, laziness. I want to just get this right off the top.
Sure. So, now I would say I consider myself to be about 95% vegan. Once in a while I do have a little bit of seafood or something, but I was a big ice cream and cheese aholic. So I come from knowing how difficult it can be to make those changes.
And I just wanted to set the groundwork here, because sometimes people come in and they've been fit and healthy all their life. So when I saw that on your website, I thought, we got to go there first.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of your website, you say the body is a self-healing entity. Can we start there? What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the things that we always go back to in chiropractic is one of those silly little things, like you cut your hand. You don't need to tell your body what to do. It knows how to heal it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing internally. Your body knows how to heal. It just needs the right atmosphere, the right ingredients, the right foods, the right neurological interactions with your nervous system and your brain, those things. It knows how to heal itself.
So if we've wandered really far away from letting our body know what to do, so you're saying basically we can get back there with a bit of work.
I'm saying within reason. There is always, physical matter has its limits. So the caveat there is most people can make great progress, but the sooner the better.
Yeah. Now, you use dis-ease, and I have used that term for years, disease and dis-ease.
Mm-hmm.
Where does it come from? Why can it spread? That's pretty general, but if you could hit on that for a minute.
Well, a lot of that depends on what philosophy you're dealing in. Traditionally, having been raised, as you will, as a chiropractor, a lot of the dis-ease in our system comes from lack of communication between the nervous system and the rest of the body. So that's one place where dis-ease can come from. But dis-ease also comes from not feeding your body properly, mental, emotional issues that are feeding into the wrong kinds of cycles. A gut microbiome that is not healthy causes all kinds of dis-ease. So there's a variety of causes of dis-ease.
I find it interesting, too, that so often we drive our cars and you don't think twice about hearing a little clunk or something. You get it into the mechanic right now.
Mm-hmm.
But, we keep on running our own bodies, machines on crappy gas
Mm-hmm.
and doing the upkeep and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get confused or we're upset when it goes astray.
Yeah.
And now go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think another thing is, because we're talking to mostly boomer women, the older we get, the more time, effort, and energy I think we need to plan on taking care of number one. So just food for thought on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's so many things as boomer women that we get used to the fact that we are doing either a little bit more slowly or thinking more a little bit about, and to be reminded that our bodies and our health need the same attention to detail and the same consideration.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you asked the questions, paleo, vegan. You've already said you're almost vegan. I'm pretty much vegetarian now. Whole food, higher, low protein, higher, low carbs. What are your answers?
Well, first of all, I come from that each person within a range needs to find their own answers. So the thing that I've settled on for myself and for anyone that wants to listen to my logic is predominantly whole food, plant-based, without dairy. And the big thing about dairy that I like to point out to people, there's actually several reasons for no dairy. Number one is humans are the only species on the planet Earth that consume milk after infancy, and not even the milk of their own species. So we are, broadly speaking, 120 to 220 pound humans, yet we are consuming the food that was designed to turn a 40-pound calf into a 1,000-pound cow in a year. Does that sound a little bit off to you?
It sounds really graphic to me. I understand too. I've read, I don't know, that even North American industrialized countries are, like, of those humans, the industrialized countries are even more so, because the other countries, they don't eat the dairy, they don't drink milk as adults, like once they grow past probably teen.
Right. Now, Europeans, especially Northern Europeans, do consume more dairy than other parts of the world. And surprise, surprise, they have the same issues that we do. But even they don't consume it to the extent that we do, I don't think.
And I hear a lot of people, when you say cheese and things like that, just going, no. But, there are flavors. But you've probably realized, and I am realizing, that, you start experimenting with things and you can duplicate those great flavors and find, and if you're not duplicating them, you're coming up with other ones that are just as great.
Or better. Yeah.
Or better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they're better because they're better for you. So it's,
and your tastes change, your taste buds change. And there are things that you can do to give food that kind of acidy, salty kind of, flavor of dairy. And, so some of the artificial cheeses work for some people. One of the things that I do, and it's not something that I do regularly, but one of the things that I do once in a while is that I will make like a cashew cheese, like a cashew cream cheese kind of thing. And I will actually go to the extent of taking a probiotic pill and putting it in there. Now, I can't necessarily say do this, because it could get contaminated, but this is what I do. I will open up a probiotic pill and put it in there and mix it in, and I'll let it incubate, at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours. And it'll get that more acidy flavor from that lactobacillus having multiplied in there. So
that's interesting. Yeah. And one of the biggest, what's the word I'm looking for? Endorsements, I guess, is I have a friend who's in her 90s. Her son is in his mid 60s. He's been a vegan for, probably all his adult life.
Mm-hmm.
And he's now taking care of her, which
Mm-hmm.
means she's eating primarily vegan.
Mm-hmm.
And when I visit her, she is so upset and she is just screaming for, like, take me for anything, fish and chips, something, except she has said recently, he bought this ice cream kind of stuff and it's vegan. It is really good. But then she swears me to secrecy, so he doesn't know that she's actually enjoying it.
There are some really good vegan frozen dessert kinds of things.
Yeah. And more vegan everything.
Yeah.
And once again, it just comes down to experimenting.
Yeah. And the thing that I do also want to mention in all that is that there's so much variation too, because there's the vegan stuff that's just full of coconut oil and fat and junk, but then there's also stuff that's more predominantly whole food.
Right.
And so I would encourage people to gravitate towards those things.
So always start with whole and then take it from there.
Yeah.
So we've talked about food a little bit. I'm going to ask you about your recommendations for health and vitality, but I'm going to ask, do they change as the decades go by? And I don't mean the calendar decades. I mean like ours, when we're in our 50s, our 60s, our 70s. Do we need different things?
I don't know that we necessarily need different things, but I do think we need to pay closer attention. So as we get older, our bodies, we all know this, our bodies don't respond the way that we used to. And so we do need to pay more attention. We do need to be more sensitive and cognizant of getting more of those fresh fruits and veggies into our diet, making sure we're getting, if we are vegan, we need to make sure that we're getting things like all the B12 that we need, which, that's one of the things that does need to be supplemented. We do need to make sure we're getting enough sunshine or vitamin D in some form, so I think the older we get, the more conscientious we need to be. And it's a matter of just kind of doubling back and thinking about those things and taking a closer look at how we're feeling.
I think too, so often we talk to boomer women, I guess, or older, and just sort of say, like, you've got to slow down on all this give, and take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is certainly part of that equation of, and you're doing people around you a favor if you're still cooking for a spouse or a partner or whatever.
Right.
You're going to be doing them a favor too. Now, where do hormones fit into this?
That's always an interesting question. And I'll tell you my story with having tried bioidentical hormones. So first of all, I do come from the belief that your body should be able to handle all the changes that it goes through in its lifetime without having to put stuff in it or, artificial stuff in it or on it, even if that stuff is quote unquote naturally derived. Having said that, when I went through the whole perimenopause thing, I had 2 teenagers at home and was running a chiropractic practice and yada, yada, yada. And you know how the mood swings and the temper flares go. Well, I decided that I would listen to a colleague's recommendations and go on bioidentical hormones, because she basically convinced me, without me really looking into it more fully, that they were safe. And literally 2 months later, I found myself 20 pounds heavier.
Wow.
And so that's when I said, enough is enough, because my mother was always a little bit heavier, but then when she went through that time of life, she started, and I refer to it as that time of life in her because she actually had a hysterectomy way before any of this happened, but she still went through all those changes, being on hormones, not being on hormones, wherever she was at that particular point, but she gained a lot of weight. And when I started gaining that weight, it was like, I'm not going there. I knew what my family history was. I was not going to go there. So I started doing the research, and that's when I started coming up with all this information that I didn't realize up until then, that guess what? Dairy is full of estrogen. Surprise, surprise. Even naturally, organically raised dairy, because it's from a cow. And it's got the amount of estrogen in it that helps grow, like I said, that little 40-pound calf into a 1,000-pound cow in a year. It's got the amount of estrogen, the amount of growth hormone, all those other growth factors in there that helps do all that. So as soon as I got the dairy out of my diet, that's when I started to see the weight starting to come off a little bit, the hormones starting to stabilize a little bit, and going from there and finding healthy sources, because we actually have multiple kinds of estrogen in our bodies, and the healthy sources of the estrogens that we need as we age, that are more from the plant estrogens, more from your flax seeds and your tofu and things like that. Once you bring those into the diet, that actually stabilizes a lot of the moods, a lot of the hot flashes. And so that was my experience. And then on top of that, I started reading more and more about the fact that those artificial hormones, even the bioidentical ones, are not as safe as we've been led to believe they are.
Two thoughts come to mind. Is first of all, any listeners, if they reach for the bucket of ice cream or the cheese or whatever, they're going to be watching that calf in their mind just grow into this 1,000-pound cow. But I know, just on back to serious note, is that when my friends and I were, 45, 50, we were obviously discussing to hormone or not to hormone. Mm-hmm. And I must admit, people were all over the map. Now, I think most of my closest friends and I just said, no, we've trusted our bodies this long, we will continue to trust them. Mm-hmm. And so far, so good. But one thing you've said there, which I think we do need to emphasize, is so many of these choices do need to be researched.
Exactly.
It sounds like you believed a trusted practitioner or colleague. Mm-hmm. And so chose at first not to do that research, but even people you trust and care about aren't always right.
And the thing of it is that it's that old thing of, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And for a medical practitioner, that hammer that they always have is that medication. And so it's going to look a lot more like the right thing to do in more situations than what's right for me personally. And so I go into any kind of relationship now fully cognizant of that, and fully cognizant of the fact that it is my body. And if a medical physician says this is the particular path that they think I should go down, I'm going to research it. I'm going to find the clinical studies in the journals and see if it really does do what it's purported to do. And, that's the path that I would choose to take if I were in that position. And that's some of the things that I like to help people with in my practice.
I think, too, it just came to me as you were saying that, is we would, as, say, 50-plus women, we would no more dream of wearing the same shirt or eating the same box of chocolates. I was just going to throw that in there. Or reading the same book. So the fact that some doctor feels comfortable saying, well, here's something that is one size fits all, right, is a little ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So good to keep that in mind. Now, hormones or hormone replacement perhaps is one myth. there's a ton of myths around diet, exercise, lifestyle. Can you think of any just off the top of your head that are like seriously need debunking?
Protein.
Oh, okay. Okay, this is good.
Yeah, protein. We have really, the food industry and the ag industry has really fed Americans a line of crap about the amount of protein that we supposedly need. And one of the places that I look to about that is, did you know, so first of all, let me preface this. Would you agree that what a human baby needs as far as protein is going to be supplied, is going to be the amount that's supplied by human breast milk and is going to be optimal for a human baby?
I'm sitting here nodding, yes.
Okay. And would you also, in that same believe that a human baby is it goes through its largest growth spurt from the age of 0 to 2 when it's consuming human milk, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So put those two things together, and what you come up with is that the amount of protein in human milk is probably much more akin to what humans need when they're growing. And the amount of protein in human milk is about 8% weight per volume. So human milk is made up of about 8% protein. So there's no need for us to be eating 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 grams of protein in a day.
Just thinking that, and that's low for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, perhaps depending on what their diet's like, but pretty much what a lot of the research is now showing is that 0.8 grams per kilogram, basically a 120-pound woman, 40 to 60 grams of protein in a day is more than adequate.
And just to remind our listeners, non-animal proteins include nuts, legumes. I'll let you finish that sentence.
Yeah. Nuts, legumes. I mean, even we don't think about it, but greens have a fair amount of protein per volume. So, even, most of your grains have some protein in them. Even, wheat has protein in it. Rice has protein in it. You don't need volumes of protein. Of course, when you're talking about beans, there's also things like tofu and tempeh and things like that that are a little bit more concentrated, where you can get a higher volume of protein if you really feel like you need it. But like I said, it's not really that much of an issue. And when you look at other species of primates, like gorillas and things like that, they're all vegan. People are always asking me, where do I get my protein from? Go ask the pregnant gorilla where she gets her protein from. She doesn't worry about it.
I don't know if this is your bailiwick or not, but speaking of protein, you'll often hear people who exercise a lot or do some, weight training. They'll say, well, no, I need more protein. Is that another myth then?
Certainly, yes.
Okay.
And for people who may not have seen it, I would highly recommend the Game Changers documentary movie.
Oh, what's that?
It's a documentary that was put together on basically vegan world-class athletes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have to look that one up. I'll have to. Sorry, what's going through my brain right now is a few people that I'll send that to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to go sideways on you here now.
Okay.
We mentioned your relationships with cheese and ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you also have quite the relationship with your bicycle. You've done some pretty major tours. Can you tell us about them?
Sure. Actually, one of the things that I did in between that time that I was transitioning from being a medical lab tech to being a chiropractor, one of the things that I did basically a cross-country bicycle tour.
So,
And
okay, just give us a start and a destination
okay,
before you explain.
yeah, okay. So it wasn't fully across the country. So I started. I was born and raised in the Boston area, and with a group of people, we actually took a Greyhound bus from the Boston area to Billings, Montana.
Okay.
Which is actually on the east side of the Continental Divide.
Okay.
And from there, we went basically through Yellowstone and the Tetons, the Sawtooth Mountains, made our way through Idaho and Oregon, hit the coast in central Oregon, and headed south from there. And the group that I was with basically kind of pre-designated that we were splitting up in San Francisco because they all had jobs to go back to that, it was summertime, they had taken 6 weeks off, whatever. But I had quit my job because I had come out there with the idea in mind that if I found someplace nice and warm and sunny that I wanted to stay, that I was just done with New England winters. It's a story behind that too. But.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Something about having to walk to work in a hospital in 80-mile-an-hour blizzard winds. I was like, no, I'm done.
I have a friend who did that in Toronto, and she's now living in the Dominican. So
Yep.
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I came out there with the idea in mind that if I found someplace nice and warm and sunny that I wanted to stay, that I probably would. And while I was cycling between Eureka and Santa Barbara, I met up with a couple of women who were also cycling the coast that also lived in Santa Barbara. So when I got there, I spent a few days with them, looked around and said, it's pretty here. Is there a hospital
here? And so there was no going back?
So basically, yeah, I did continue down the coast because I had friends in Santa Monica that I wanted to visit. I had a friend in San Diego that I wanted to visit. So I went down there, turned around, came back up, and started looking for work. And the rest is kind of history. Actually, met my ex-husband there about 6 months later. So yeah.
And listeners know that we're on Zoom, and I can see that you're in your riding gear right now because you've just spent a bunch of today out riding. So This wasn't just when you were young. You've continued to ride.
Right. Yeah.
All of your adult life.
I've continued to ride. I've continued to tour. I did about 600 plus miles in Utah, Colorado, and Montana this past summer. Wow. Including going to the Sun Highway, which is actually what you're looking at on my background. Okay. You can see it, but they can't. No,
but Google it, folks. I've done it in a car, and it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly a slow ride. Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
The incline is quite something.
Yeah. This picture was taken coming down the hill from there. Across the canyon. Amazing.
Yeah. And we won't talk about the fact that you left the eastern seaboard and there's all the snow on the mountain.
Well, but, snow on the mountain, yes, but it was still, it was July or June and it was in the 50s. So it was like not consequential.
Yeah, no. And it's a passing through kind of thing.
Yeah, and passing through. Yeah.
We've wandered all over the map this morning, Leslie, and I appreciate that. I've sort of been taking you all over the place. What haven't we discussed that you feel is important for boomer women to know or think about?
Well, I would say one of the things is not just dutifully doing what a medical doctor says that you should, be it a mammogram, a colonoscopy, or any of those things, not that you shouldn't have those things done, but that you should examine the idea of doing them and see whether or not those things are appropriate and necessary for you. Because basically where medical doctors come from with this stuff is, oh, you're this age, you should have this test because there's this infinitesimally small possibility that it could find something that you might not otherwise find, and that thing could be harmful. And when you really go down the tunnel and you really look at that, you find out, for example, that as far as, at least with mammograms, that the cancers that are found during mammography are often not the cancers that are going to kill you. And, you talk to enough women, you'll find out that most women that have had serious cancers, those have been cancers that they found themselves in between mammograms.
Just thinking, too, that so many boomer women are caregivers and are quite ready to be confrontational with a parent's doctor. What exactly is this? Why are we doing it? Why are you wanting that? So to actually do that for themselves as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with things like colonoscopies, there are tests that they can do. There are now tests that they can do that are more genetic analysis tests of stool samples that are supposed to be like 95% of the accuracy of a colonoscopy. Wow. So maybe you have them done, so the standard is that you might need to have them done a little bit more often than once every 10 years.
Yeah.
They don't have the potential side effects or potential dangers.
I have several friends who've had colonoscopies, and it's doesn't sound at all.
I have a friend who was actually a registered nurse, went in and had a routine colonoscopy and wound up in the hospital for 3 weeks with a ruptured colon.
Wow. And
it's come to find out that it's not actually that uncommon.
Yeah, do your research, folks. Yeah. And we're so lucky living in the time.
There again, I'm not saying don't do it.
Yeah.
I'm saying it all has to be evaluated in the spectrum of things.
Yeah. And just while we're talking about doing research, I just want to emphasize, too, that Dr. Google is great, but Dr. Google can also send you down some rabbit holes. So just make sure you've got some really credible places to research that you're going to.
And and I'm happy to help people out with research, not that I'm going to advise them, because I'm not, but I can help them find some articles and help them kind of parse through them and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Interesting. I like asking that question of what haven't I asked you, and that's just such a great answer. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this chat, I mentioned that we're in December now with all sorts of indulgences ahead of us, which we seem to justify because there's always New Year's resolutions.
Oh, yes.
Before we close, could you give us a few tips to make it through the season more successfully?
I think one of the things is that if you are going to try to be more conscious, the easiest way to do that is to bring food with you. If you go to a party, bring something healthy with you. Not that you're not going to eat other things, but at least if you start out by bringing something healthy and you eat that, you're going to be less able to eat all of the other stuff. So that's one suggestion, is to bring something healthy with you. And most events these days are potluck anyway, so that's not difficult. That's probably one of my main things that I would say.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just try to be, try to be more cognizant of it and work from the perspective that your body can learn new things in terms of, whatever. It's going to take a while if you're trying to get past that desire for the cheese or whatever, but your body will get used to the things that you're putting into it and will come to want those things.
Yeah, I used to recommend to people too that just be careful with the alcohol consumption, because after a couple of drinks, suddenly those exotic, desserts and ice cream and all that stuff just looks so good. Minced tarts, it's
Yeah.
your resolve wears down after a couple of drinks.
Yeah. And that's one of the things for me personally. I know that's a big one, is that I try and stay away from alcohol completely anymore, because if I have a drink, I know that as soon as I have that drink, I'm going back to that table, and I'm going back to that table, and I'm going back to that table. And
and then if you don't hate yourself in the morning, it's because you're too busy in the bathroom. Just
yeah,
it makes you sick. If you're used to eating healthy, you just splurge like that, and it just does not sit well.
Yeah.
So you coach on more than making it through a holiday season, and you have a Journey to Wellness group. Tell our listeners about what you do, please.
That's actually one of the groups that I haven't done in a while.
Oh, okay. I was operating off a website.
Yeah, that's okay. So the Journey to Wellness group is basically a small group program that's designed basically to take a group of women. It's about an 8-week program. Well, it's an 8-session program, and I usually do it every other week. So it's about a 16-week program. And it's basically just designed to help people get a good, healthy start on going from point A to point B with their diet, with understanding a deeper why of the hormone balance and what to put on your plate, what I suggest that you don't put on your plate. A lot of what we didn't even talk about, a lot of what I do recommend as far as what people should eat is based more on the blue zone countries and blue zone regions and the kinds of foods that they eat. So we talk about those kinds of things and who those people are and what their diets are like. And we go through some of the hormone balance stuff. And like I said, about 8 different sessions over 16 weeks.
Oh, that's good. I noticed that, and I don't know if you do this or not still, but clean out your pantry thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what a great idea that is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done that over Zoom with people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you find there's resistance to those people who say, but I paid good money for this. What am I, supposed to do with it?
Well, if it's unopened, they can always donate it.
Yeah. And I think too, it comes down to put a price on your health.
Yeah, exactly. I like to tell people you're either investing in your wellness or you're contributing to your illness.
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. You have your own podcast.
I do. We're just starting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I love podcasts, obviously.
Yeah.
So please share. What's it called?
So I have just taken over being one of the co-hosts of an already established podcast, which is Alternative Health Tools. And that's a podcast that actually goes all the way back to 2014, which is like the very infancy of podcasting.
Yeah.
And the guy who produces it is quite attached to it staying on the air. So when his current host said, I want to move on, he found a couple of other hosts. So myself and Angie Ates are the new co-hosts. And we're actually just starting. We actually just did our first couple of sessions a couple of weeks ago. So they're starting to be released next week. I think we're releasing a new one. But we did like an early release of like an introducing us kind of thing. And yeah, so.
Oh, that's good. And is that on most platforms?
Yeah,
podcast?
It's on all the platforms.
Oh, that's good.
So it's
Okay.
Alternative Health Tools.
Oh, sounds like
yeah.
I must listen. Good.
Yeah.
Where else do we find you online?
My website is drlesliek.com. And that's probably the easiest place to start. Just that. And my Instagram is dr.lesliek. And, the rest of it you can just put on the show notes or something. There's no sense in giving people 1,000 things.
Well, it's funny too, because that's where I go next, is as always, those links will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
Listeners, I do recommend you visit Leslie's website, as well as great info and tips and great articles on the blog page. I need to mention the healthy recipes page, as after we wrap here, I'm off to use some of my plethora. I have literally 500 apples from my backyard.
Nice.
I'm going to make that magical applesauce vinaigrette. Sounded great. And I obviously got browsing because I'm also going to print the sweet potato tacos with cabbage cups recipe for later this week.
I like that one.
It looked and sounded great.
Yeah.
So.
And, a lot of those recipes are from other authors and, I've given them appropriate credit, but I do have a few of my own recipes in there. So, yeah.
I'll go dig around again because, as I say, I was looking at pictures going like, whoa, glance through the ingredients going like, oh, I like this one. So if you have comments on today's show, leave them where you're listening to this podcast or at twoboomerwomen.com/join-the-conversation. If you'd like to be a guest on podcast or know someone who'd be a great guest, there's an application form at the website too. Dr. Leslie Kasanoff, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks.